I never really grew up with any negative stories of menopause. I think I was in my mid-40s, so it's been about 10 years. And I've heard my mom say it runs in the family, where grandma and she it also experienced it in their mid-40s. So I'd heard that sort of growing up, and so when it happened, I was, I would say, prepared for it. So I grew up in India, and I was there from the ages of 5 to 23. So a good part of my life and my childhood, my teen years, and very early adulthood was in India predominantly, and then in different parts of Asia. And when I look back now that I've lived in Canada for more than 30 years, longer than I lived in India, when I look back, I think one thing that was fundamentally different for me in a very positive way was that I never really grew up with any negative stories of menopause. I was exposed to a large number of women, both in my family, in the community, and India is a very populated country, so you meet lots of women all the time. But it was more talked about as an important chapter in a woman's life, or it's a natural occurrence. So those were the narratives I grew up with. I don't have, honestly, a single negative comment or story from my mother with regards to menopause. Though I was with her when it happened, the only thing I remember her saying on one or two occasions is that it's a good thing I don't have my periods now, because I don't have to think about when do I go to the temple. Something in the context of cultural norms or whatever be the case. But my mother's reflections and her sharing of what happened was definitely not negative, and it was not a topic that came up quite a bit, but it was commented on. So I've got a very different take on menopause, and it's very well reflected in my personal experience too. Frankly, I just noticed that I wasn't getting my periods as regularly as I did, and I thought to myself, oh, it looks like I'm entering this phase, and that was pretty much it. Like I said, and also because I think I'm by nature a very philosophical person, and I have been heavily influenced by Eastern ways of thinking, indigenous ways of thinking. I've spent a tremendous amount of time growing up in South Asia, but also living in Haida Gwaii here in Canada, and for the last 30 years working with indigenous communities. So I think by nature I'm more philosophical and reflective, but also the way I look and think about my life or my body or the different stages of it is more in terms of this is a journey that you're on, and there's going to be all kinds of experiences. So I don't necessarily label it or put it into different boxes and respond, very differently, to it. I generally try to have a more calm and a more appreciative sort of a response to life in general. So I think for me it was something I noticed, and I mentioned it to family members I was close to, or some colleagues I was close to, and then I just went on with my life. But like I said, I was preparing myself, and I was quite prepared when it happened, and I had done a lot of research into how women in different parts of the world experience menopause. And I was quite fascinated by how women in Asia experience it, and specifically women in Japan, who I think it's well researched. The experience of menopause is quite unique, and even the physical symptoms can be very different from what's experienced from, say, the Western, part of the world. And a lot of it, has been linked to, say, diet or, other factors. And it's a small factor. I'm not saying it's the be-all and end-all, but it had a huge influence on me. And with regards to medical symptoms or symptoms per se, I have always, I'm 50, almost 56, and 95% of the time I've generally taken medicine or medication or treatments that's generally Ayurveda. A lot of it is around massage, it's herbal oils massages. A lot of it is about self-care and just taking the time to de-stress your body and feel a bit more balanced, right? So it's got to do more about being able to express how you're feeling, and then, counting on age-old wisdom to see how your body perhaps, does well or doesn't do well with it. 3 years ago, I got diagnosed with trigeminal neuralgia by a neurologist right here in Vancouver. And I had to be off work for an extensive period of time because of the debilitating pain on my cheek. And the medication had to be increased quite a bit, to the point that it was difficult for me to go to work. And I consulted with my GP and with my neurologist, and I said, I know that ultimately I might need to come back to this, but I would like to try other options because I have done my research and there are other options which I would like to check it out. And both of them encouraged me to actually do it. So I went back to India and I was treated for a month, and that was about 2.5 years ago. And I've been off my trigeminal neuralgia medication, and I've never had that pain return. So for me, it is, I'm not a doctor. I'm in no way, promoting one system or the other. That's not the point. But my point is that I think at different stages of life, one is bound to go through a lot of physical and mental experiences, some more difficult than the other. And how we understand it, how we perceive it, how we make sense of it, I think changes the way, we react to those, situations. I think what I'd like to really share is that, and I think when I look back, like I said, I've spent more time in Canada than I've done in my motherland. Yes. And in this 30 years, the most impactful and influential, I would say, aspect of being Canadian and living in Canada is my experience with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities, right? And so when I talk about Canada, much of what I speak is about what I've learned from being in touch with and being fortunate to have Indigenous friends and to have lived in Haida Gwaii. And I found a lot of similarities in the worldviews of Indigenous peoples, towards health, wellness, and illness, and of, say, South Asian cultures. And so when I was in Haida Gwaii, when I would talk about how my children were feeling or how I was feeling, the way a matriarch would respond was quite similar to how, say, my grandmother would have responded or something, though they're Canadians and, they're first, peoples, right? So I think the only thing I have to say is that I'm someone who greatly respects different viewpoints. I'm not one of those people you can put in a polarized camp and expect to yell at the person, across the room, because we don't know what we don't know. How we understand things, knowledge is not wisdom. They're very different, right? So are we just acquiring information and then allowing bodies that have authority or power over our lives to push that information down to us? Or are we critically thinking for ourselves and doing the research and opening ourselves up to learning from women, learning from people from around the world, from different cultures, different backgrounds? I think just enriches our life. Well, I hope there's more of this, more of honest storytelling, because each person is going to have a very different opinion of menopause, a very different experience of menopause, and society's expectations about what happens during the time is always going to be a pressure, on individuals who menstruate, right? And I hope that just as we teach children confidence, we teach children to feel comfortable in their skin, I hope that we will become part of a society where we help people navigate life and the different chapters of life in a way that is more kinder, you know, and there is less pressure, there's less judgment, you know, and there's a deeper kind of understanding of this very natural human occurrence, and you know, that's part and parcel of our lives.
Thanks for watching this episode. For more menopause stories like this, subscribe below, and don't forget to click the bell so you are notified when we drop a new episode. Did you connect with this story? Let us know by adding your comment and by sharing and liking it. Shared storytelling helps us learn what's happening to our bodies and reminds us we are not alone.